Hello, my name is Megan O'Quinn. I am the Vice President of Brand Management at iCEV and help lead our curriculum development team. Thank you for joining me for the iCEV 360 using iCEV in any learning environment session. I hope you stick around for the live Q&A at the conclusion of the session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started. The focus of this session is for different methods to utilize iCEV, regardless of what learning environment you're in. Learning environments can refer to a variety of different scenarios, so whether that means synchronous or asynchronous, or being in person, virtual, or hybrid to you. So really just wanted to provide you with some tips and tricks of how you can use iCEV in any of those scenarios. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was just defining synchronous and asynchronous, since it can apply to a lot of the different learning models that we're going to talk about later on. So synchronous learning is when teachers and students are participating in learning activities at the same time. So your traditional in-person student interaction would be synchronous learning. Other examples would be if you live streamed your lecture, or if you had very scheduled assessments or group calls that the students would be on. Asynchronous learning is when teachers and students are doing the learning activities over the same material, but at different times. So whether that's a recorded presentation that the students are watching, discussion boards, collaborative documents, it's really important to know too that asynchronous doesn't just mean hybrid or virtual. You can have asynchronous in an in-person environment as well. But both of these techniques can really be used in any setting. So as we start talking about utilizing iCEV, there's a few different models that I want to talk about. The flipped classroom model, and then also blended learning models that can be used in in-person, hybrid, and virtual formats. So to start off with, talking material prior to coming to class through videos, readings, or labs, and then the actual class time is utilized to create a deeper understanding through discussion with fellow students or projects and activities, or even further lecture facilitated by you as an instructor. This model is really flexible and can be utilized in person, virtually, or in a hybrid setting. So if we're wanting to talk about implementing this flipped classroom model with iCEV in an in-person setting, just kind of want to walk you through some of those very basic steps for that. So prior to class, students could watch the video segment or go through the slide deck, and then also complete those key concepts or the worksheet that goes along with that, just to make sure that those are being completed and watched. The worksheet or those key concepts is an interactive assignment, so those would be self-graded for you, and just serves as a good way to check and make sure that they've gone through that content. Then when a student arrives in class, you can have that class discussion reviewing those concepts presented in the video or the slide deck. Students can also complete an activity or a project which accompanies that lesson as well, just to further dive into the content. Students also can complete that segment's assessment, and that's also an interactive assignment that can be completed and would be self-graded for you. So that's just kind of a very basic overview of how you could use that model with iCEV in an in-person setting. If you were virtual or hybrid, you can use very similar methodologies or strategies and just tweak a few things. So students could watch those videos or lectures at a time that's on their own. So outside of when you would have that scheduled face-to-face time in a virtual or a hybrid setting. And you then would be able to use your in-person or your real-time interaction with them to further discuss and collaborate on those different items. So you could use those Zoom meetings, Google Hangouts, or Microsoft Teams to have kind of that real-time discussion. But outside of that, they would be doing the watching of the video or the lecture separately. If you're planning for a flipped classroom with iCEV, each lesson is going to have a corresponding lesson plan, which lays out a potential scope and sequence for the lesson. This plan is not specific to a flipped classroom, but it will show you how the lesson is designed, as well as all of the pieces that accompany an iCEV lesson. When moving into blended learning models, these are going to be a combination of teacher-led and student-led learning experiences, which can take place both online and in classroom settings. There's lots of different ways to apply blended learning. The flipped classroom is actually a blended learning model, but a few others are station rotation, individual rotation, flex, and a la carte. So let's take a look at station rotation first. This is when students are split into small groups and complete learning objectives by rotating through those different stations. And so if you're using a computer lab, it can also be referred to as lab rotation. And this is going to function very similarly to the centers concept in elementary ed. And it can really be implemented in any learning environment, whether that's in person, hybrid, or virtual. So if we're looking at how to use station rotation with iCEV, you can have a teacher-led instruction station where iCEV materials are used while lecturing, and students can complete some of those different checks for understanding or those key concepts while that content is being covered. There can also be an online learning station where iCEV's interactive assignments are used. The hands-on station, if you identify some different hands-on options for activities or projects listed in the lesson plan, you could supply those there. And then at a collaboration station, if you identified any group projects or activities, those could be great fits for that station. You can also have students just collaborate with each other by presenting the topics to one another, and even facilitate some peer-to-peer learning. Moving into individual rotation, these are going to, rather than the station rotation, which was groups moving around, these are going to be individual students rotating through the stations based on a schedule set by the teacher. So students do not have to typically rotate to all stations, just typically the rotations that the teacher has identified for them on their schedule. This helps personalize student learning and allows to better meet the needs of each student, as each station can be geared more to match a student's learning style. Talking about using individual rotation with iCEV, it's great for hands-on subjects such as welding, culinary arts, fashion design, nursing skills, STEM. So really anything that has kind of that hands-on component would be great for individual rotation. And so the way that this could be set up is you have an iCEV content station where students can go through the content and the concepts and learn some of those different skills by watching those videos or going through those slide decks. There can also be a teacher-led instruction station, which is where some of those hands-on demonstrations that you want to show your students could be completed. So for instance, if you were doing welding, it could be the in-shop demonstrations that you're wanting to show, or fashion design could be a sewing lab where you're wanting to show the stitching to them. So just having that teacher-led instruction station, there's a lot of different options that you could do there. The other two stations, or those other two areas for rotation, would be individual, or a location where they're completing just really individualized items, whether that's the checks for understanding, the more simple activities and projects, or doing some more of that interactive assignment type work. And then there's a group station, which could be used to simulate a real work environment or have students work on group projects there. The flex model allows students to move on fluid schedules through stations or learning activities according to their needs. This reminds me a lot of self-paced learning and having the student kind of lead their their learning environment until they get to the desired endpoint. This model is really going to focus on using online learning as the main delivery for content, with educators really just providing support and instruction as needed. This model gives students a very high degree of control over their learning. So if you're wanting to implement this flex learning model with iCEV, utilizing the action plan that's associated with each lesson can be super helpful. The action plan is just a student version of the teacher lesson plan, and it's just a step-by-step guide of how to go through the lesson. So they're able to follow through with those steps and then kind of go at their own pace as they're completing those. One thing that I would suggest for this model, if you're using it, is just to make sure that you are putting due dates in for those interactive assignments, whether that's in the iCEV system or in your LMS. So just making sure that even though they're able to move at their own pace, there is an endpoint that they're trying to meet from an assignment standpoint. The a la carte model typically involves the teacher developing a list of potential activities or projects that students can choose from to complete. This could be a choice board, or it could be just a simple list. Students must complete their learning objectives during a set time period. And so, for instance, a teacher might provide a list of a few different ways to review vocabulary and require the student to pick one or two methods. And they're able to choose one of those options and go through from that way. If you're wanting to use a la carte with iCEV, again, referencing those action plans that can serve as a to-do list, but then also utilizing that teacher lesson plan to know all of the different options that you have for activities and projects. But that a la carte model would work really well with utilizing those action plans as well. There's lots of different activity and project ideas that typically accompany each lesson. So if you're planning for that, you can have students choose between some of those different activities and projects based on their interest or what they want to dive deeper into within the lesson. This is just a very basic breakdown of how that a la carte method could work. First step being that they receive direct instruction by watching the video, going through the slide deck, or you lecturing. And then moving into practicing vocabulary. And again, just offering some different options that they can pick from. And then ending with assessing their learning. And again, just providing some different options that they can choose from. And so having a pick one, a pick two, or even implementing those choice boards and playing tic-tac-toe with those would be a great option for this a la carte delivery method. So thank you so much for joining my session. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all about how to use iCEV in a variety of learning environments. You will automatically be awarded points for attending this session. At the end of the conference, you'll receive a digital certificate noting how many sessions you attended. I hope to see you during our live Q&A right after this.